Today we're looking at a spectacular home way up in the mountains in Uvita, Costa Rica. It's right on the west coast, and it's so high up that even though the home is made of concrete, it feels like a treehouse floating above the jungle. And it's got a few surprises I want to show you, so let's take a look, starting with the kitchen. So the first thing you notice when you step in this kitchen is how open it feels. It's got this big concrete island in the middle, and across from the island, this reddish countertop that stretches along the wall and goes all the way down to the fridge. And it's not overly cluttered with stuff. You've just got all the essentials you need to cook in a tropical environment like this, with the kitchen all the way open down to the living room and the terrace, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, as you can see, these two photos were taken around sunset, and what's nice about the way the light hits the kitchen is how warm everything gets at this time of day. You can see the glow bouncing off of the concrete island and the shelves, and it's just so soft and welcoming that it makes all these hard raw materials feel less industrial and more lived in. And so it makes you actually want to hang out in here instead of just passing through the kitchen on your way to the living room. But if we look at the kitchen earlier in the day during broad daylight, you can tell that the mood is pretty different, and you've got all this green flowing in. And suddenly the room feels even brighter and more open than it did at sunset. And I'm sure you can imagine you get all these really nice shadows from the trees outside just dancing and flickering in a way that just makes the entire kitchen feel alive. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that the edges of the island do look pretty sharp. So this may not be the most child-friendly kitchen out there because you don't want your kid running around and getting an eye full of concrete. But as you'll see throughout this video, this really isn't a place built for kids anyway, so I don't think the owners are too concerned about that. But the other thing that really makes this kitchen feel open when you're in it are these glass doors, because they allow that front terrace to feel like a natural extension of the kitchen. So even when you're cooking or just prepping food, the kitchen never feels isolated because you still feel the breeze coming in from outside, you still hear the sounds of the leaves, and someone could be sitting right there on the terrace just a few feet away and there wouldn't be any barrier between you. Now, as we step into the living and dining room here, we've got this big daybed here on the left side, and there's kind of a weathered, tattered rug in front of it, which, certainly isn't the cleanest thing in the world, but it does add some nice texture and warmth underfoot, especially if it's wet outside or something like that. And it's really nice to have something like this, especially given that the rest of this floor is all completely concrete. And then on the right side, we've got this very old dining table and a couple of chairs next to it, which again, just brings in some natural textures into this room. Now, one of the things I love about this room is this huge piece of art sitting above the daybed here, because the fact that they've gone with such a large statement piece and brought in the tones from outside in the jungle, these very earthy tones, I just think it was an excellent choice rather than peppering the walls with a bunch of smaller pieces. And another thing I think is super cool, which I didn't notice earlier, is how raw and authentic the ceiling is. Obviously, we've got concrete floors and we've got the concrete island in the kitchen, but we also have this concrete ceiling with these beautiful track lights and what appears to be like a 50-year-old fan here. And so it just brings that rustic vibe and makes the space feel so incredibly authentic. Now, as we twist our perspective here, you get an even better view of how the living and dining room is fully exposed to the jungle and ocean beyond. And the entire front wall just disappears, so the living area literally just bleeds into the landscape in a way that feels almost unreal. I think when you see the daybed from this angle, it makes a lot more sense because it's positioned to face the view, because this is absolutely where you'd be spending most of your time in this house. And with the breeze blowing through and the sound of the jungle all around you, this is the perfect place for either a slow morning or for winding down in the evening. Now, you can also see the dining table on the left here with these two sets of matching chairs, two wishbone chairs and two others, and then this really ugly white chair here in the front. Personally, I think this kind of ruins the mood of the space because everything else is so natural and has these beautiful natural textures, whereas this just feels so incredibly out of place, and the first thing I would do if I moved into this place would be to get rid of it. And speaking of those nice textures, having this rammed earth wall beside the table just adds so much warmth and depth, and really balances out all the concrete and metal throughout the rest of the room. And then as you step out onto the terrace, this view is just incredible. You saw in the last photo there were two of these chairs out here, and now we just see one with the two small side tables, but I think the important thing to note here is how low all the furniture sits, because the tables are super small and even the chairs themselves sit really low to the ground, which is definitely a deliberate choice for two big reasons. Number one, if you're inside in the kitchen or the living room, especially if you're laying down on the daybed, you don't want any furniture blocking your view, right? Keeping that furniture low was definitely a smart choice. But also, when you're out here on the terrace, you want to feel fully immersed in nature. and that means not having anything above you. So by keeping the furniture super low to the ground, you open up the visual field above you, and it allows you to see the sky and the jungle in every direction. And speaking of the jungle, just look at how beautifully the surrounding trees create this sort of canopy of curtains, right? It really is like a set of curtains hugging this home. And I think the decision to allow the trees to grow in this way was just the exact right decision here. Now, on the other end of the kitchen is this small little office/library space. And it's kind of interesting how they use the kitchen in the middle to separate the two seating areas. One that's more designed for working and one that's the dining and living room. And personally, I feel like this layout choice was probably more a function of the limited square footage of this home and less about having the optimal flow through the space. Because if you need to do some serious work, you don't want to be sitting right next to the kitchen where someone is cooking or you've got some friends hanging out. That's exactly where this desk is. But still, there are a few interesting things to look at here. First, there's another beautiful big piece of art behind the desk here, and also a pretty interesting idea to use the surfboard as a piece of decor as well. Personally, I probably would have removed the surfboard and just had the one piece of art square behind the desk. I'm guessing that because they live in Costa Rica and right next to the coast, surfing is probably a big part of their lifestyle, and maybe this is just part decor and part storage because this is the most convenient place for them to store the surfboard. But I also really like the rugs on the floor here, which again just warm up the space because it can get pretty cold when you're just walking on concrete all day. And then if we look at this same room from this other angle, you get to see even more of what's going on. We've got another large piece of art on the wall, a telescope here that I think frankly is kind of out of place and might be better suited for the terrace, and then this lounge chair on the floor which actually kind of takes up a lot of space and I feel like wouldn't get used very much given that you've got such a big beautiful daybed next to the amazing views. And then they've also got these stacks of books. So if they're fake, then that's fine, but it just feels like a bit of a cheesy decor item to me. And if they're real, then it feels like a liability to me, and I'd rather just have them on a shelf, because of course they look good now, but how good do they look when they're scattered all over your floor and knocking over your telescope, right? Not exactly a good look. Now, one other thing I should point out here is this lighting fixture, which sits pretty much right above these small tables next to the lounge chair here, because it looks like it's actually quite an opaque material. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the light won't come out in a soft glow, but instead it'll actually beam down like a beam from a UFO. And so I don't know if that's the case because we don't have any photos of this room at night, but if that is how it looks, then I'm a little bit skeptical about this. Of course, it could look kind of cool depending on how strong that beam of light is. This is something that's really easy to get wrong, so I wouldn't rush out to get something like this and put it in your own home. But now let's go downstairs and check out the bedrooms. So this is a shot from the lower terrace looking into the bedrooms, and even though it's not obvious here, these are actually two separate bedrooms with a wall right in the middle. So these are super small, really just the width of the bed with a tiny bit of walking space on the side, and they've got this same floor-to-ceiling glass that we had upstairs, so at least the views are still open if you're on the lower level of the house. And you can open up these glass doors and walk straight out of the bedroom onto the terrace and into the pool, which I'll get to in just a minute. Now, the interesting thing they did here is because the bed is just a thick platform mattress on the floor with no bed frame whatsoever, it makes the views outdoors feel even bigger because nothing is blocking that glass wall and you just feel insignificant compared to the nature outside. And I think it was a good choice to put both of these bedrooms in this soft, dusty pink that feels warm and pretty relaxed. Now, the big obvious thing that they're missing in these bedrooms is storage, because you've got just pretty much this one shelf and clothes rack for a couple of items, and the rest of your stuff has to stay in the storage area, which is across the hall next to the laundry. So to be honest, the bedrooms aren't the most inspiring place here, and we don't have any photos from the bedrooms themselves looking outward to see how good the view is when you're laying down. But most likely, this will just be a place for sleeping because you've got some incredible spaces for hanging out upstairs. All right, now right around the corner from the bedrooms is this small bathroom, which is the only bathroom they've got here, but it uses a similar color palette with this same kind of dusty, cloudy pink. Now, one thing that's a bit unique about this bathroom is that when you're washing your hands at the sink, there's actually no mirror in front of you. Instead, the mirror is off to the right and you're looking straight out into the jungle. Now, I know a lot of people may not appreciate that because they want to look at themselves when they're brushing their teeth or whatever, but I thought it was a nice little detail. And they've also got this little shower stall here as well, but I think one of the big things they missed on this home is not having an outdoor shower. I mean, when you're already in the jungle, why would you not include an outdoor shower that just allows you to be in nature? They've got so much privacy here that I think this was quite a miss. But one thing they did do right, instead of the outdoor shower, they included an outdoor barbecue area, which is right next to the dining room, and absolutely essential in a home like this. It's pretty tucked away here, so if you weren't aware of it, then you might just not notice this at all. But if you're gonna have friends over, have some beers, have a barbecue, then a space like this is just an absolute must. But once you make your way down to the pool, the entire atmosphere shifts again, almost like you've stepped into a completely different part of the property. And the first thing you notice is that the pool isn't shaped the way you'd expect. It's not some clean, perfect rectangle. Instead, it follows the natural slope of the hill, and so the outer edge angles and tapers as the terrain drops, and so the geometry feels almost like it was sculpted by the landscape itself. And that odd shape creates this really beautiful tension between the sharp concrete lines and the softness of all the plants pressing in from every side. And check out this cool built-in seat at the far end. It's this monolithic slab that rises straight out of the pool wall, but because it's tucked so tightly into the foliage, it's like a private little getaway. You're surrounded on all sides by layers of jungle, so when you sit there, you just get this sense of being hugged by Mother Nature. So it's not some lounge chair thrown beside the pool, it's literally part of the pool itself, and it gives the whole thing this serene, almost meditative quality. But what makes this entire pool area even more striking is how low and minimal the outer edge of the pool is. Because from most angles, you barely see a border at all, which means the pool feels like an infinity pool without actually being one. And with the surrounding vegetation climbing right up to the edges of the pool, it never feels exposed or overly designed. It just feels natural, like it belongs exactly where it is. And even from above, you can see how the pool is nestled right here into the hillside, with the stepping stone path weaving down beside it and all the dense planting wrapping around those concrete forms. It's got a pretty tiny footprint, but it's layered in such a thoughtful way that it feels like its own small sanctuary. But in my view, the real magic here happens at sunset. Because when light drops and hits the water at the right angle, the surface turns into a mirror, and you get these incredibly crisp reflections of the trees and the sky, and it's kind of this surreal effect where it's hard to tell where the pool ends and where the landscape begins. Now, there's one more piece of this home that we haven't explored yet, and that's the rooftop. And when you head up to the rooftop, you take this path of metal stairs that's tucked right into the greenery, and those stairs are thin and a little bit weathered, so the color just blends in with the red soil and this earthen wall. And once you get up to the rooftop, it's just a total lookout point. Very simple up here. Right now they've got 2 chairs and a small table. You can imagine when the sun is setting, as it is in these photos, this is just the most spectacular place to spend time, right? Unobstructed views of the ocean, no one looking at you from anywhere else. You're completely private, completely secluded, and completely calm. This is the kind of cherry on top that makes a home just feel so good and make you never want to leave. But with all that said, what lessons can we take from this home? Number 1, you don't need a large lot or even a large floor plan to create an exceptional space. Here, they created something pretty special on a relatively small lot by extending how large the home feels using this incredible view. Number 2, whenever you're working with cold materials like concrete, you always want to balance them with something warmer. And that's why they laid down all those rugs upstairs, used pastel colors downstairs, and used natural textures all over the home to warm it up and make it feel inviting. And number 3, you want to take advantage of what you've got. So here, they obviously have this incredible view, but they've also capitalized on including an outdoor barbecue and a rooftop that I'm sure they use all the time. Now, I still think they missed the mark in some small ways, like not having an outdoor shower, but overall, they've done a pretty darn good job here when it comes to maximizing what they had. And overall, I think the result is pretty impressive. So if you like this video, I've linked to a few more in the description below, and I especially think you'll like this video up here, which is about an apartment in Berlin that used to be one of Germany's largest department stores. I'll see you there.